I just sailed on an Alaskan cruise where I witnessed something that was quite staggering. 5 very large cruise ships all docked at the very same time in Juneau, Alaska. The Carnival Miracle, the Holland America Koningsdam, Holland America's Eurodam, Royal Princess, and the Celebrity Edge. Now that's roughly 15 to 20,000 cruise passengers all flooded into a town of just 30,000 people, and I did happen to be one of them. Has Alaska cruising gotten too big for its own good? My cruise was a 7-night Alaska cruise on board Holland America's Koningsdam. It was round trip out of Vancouver, and on this trip we hit Juneau, Skagway, and Ketchikan. It was a beautiful trip to one of the most scenic destinations on the entire planet, but something was just nagging at me the entire time in several of these ports, and certainly something that I noticed the moment that we pulled into Juneau on the first port day, and I saw those 4 other cruise ships coming in behind us. Today, I went and dug into the data, and what I found is something worth sharing, and that's because Alaska cruising isn't just growing, but it's actually exploding, and the people who live in Alaska are starting to take notice of this. Let's start with the raw numbers that I found because I feel like they tell a very compelling story all by themselves. Let's go back to the year 1997. In 1997, Juneau, which does happen to be the most visited cruise port in all of Alaska, welcomed about 500,000 cruise passengers that year. Now that sounds like a lot, but by 2025, that number had climbed to 1.67 million people. Now that's a 234% increase in less than 30 years, and these aren't half-empty ships that are padding their numbers. In 2024, Alaska cruise ships were sailing at 104% capacity. That means that families were tripling up in those cabins, kids were on the pull-out sofas, and every available berth on board the ship was filled. In fact, cruise ships were more full in Alaska than they were literally anywhere else in the world. It's just a popular place to cruise and becoming exponentially even more so. In 2025, a record 1.9 million passengers sailed to Alaska just out of Seattle alone. Vancouver added another 1.2 million on top of that number. Now, here's a larger picture. AAA projected that 19 million Americans would cruise in 2025. That's the 3rd consecutive year of record volume. And the fastest growing segment of that market, well, you guessed it, it's Alaska cruises. And it's not just the passengers, it's more ships coming into these ports in Alaska, and now more cruise lines than ever before. In fact, just this year alone, the 2026 Alaska season has seen the biggest fleet expansion in recent memory. Princess Cruises debuted their brand new Star Princess, which is part of their Spear class. Disney Cruise Line added a second Alaska ship, the Disney Magic, sailing alongside the Disney Wonder up there. And 2 brand new players entered the Alaska market for the very first time this season. The first of those, MSC Cruises, which is traditionally focused more on the European and the Caribbean markets. Well, they just sent their first ship to Alaska, home porting it out of Seattle. And then Virgin Voyages sent their newest ship, the Brilliant Lady, to Alaska this season. This season alone, 2026, there are some 60 ships deployed across Alaska's Inside Passage. That's not 60 sailings, that's 60 ships that are rotating in and out of those ports all season long. The cruise lines smell the opportunity in that fresh Alaskan air. Alaska commands premium prices for cruise lines. Ships are sold out. The season is very short. It lasts just from April to October, so roughly half or a little bit less than half the year. But the returns for the cruise lines are high enough that they are willing to reposition ships all the way through the Panama Canal from the Caribbean just to be there, just to capitalize on those premium prices that they can charge for an Alaskan cruise. Here's where it gets a little bit personal for me, and I felt some of the effects of this surge because my sailing on the Koningsdam went to Juneau, Skagway, and Ketchikan, as I mentioned. Now, all of these are great ports, and I love them all, but other Koningsdam sailing this season, most of them in fact, included Glacier Bay National Park, which is arguably the crown jewel of Alaska cruising. It features floating icebergs, massive tidewater glaciers, and it's completed by national park rangers actually coming on board the ship. It's truly a spectacular experience. I was able to sail there in 2023 on board the Norwegian Encore and really enjoyed that. However, my sailing on the Koningsdam did not go It was one of the few Koningsdam itineraries this season that didn't, and that really had me thinking about the why. Well, Glacier Bay is a federally regulated national park, and the National Park Service actually limits cruise ships to a strict maximum of only 2 ships per day, and that's legally enforced. There are only 7 cruise lines that can actually even enter Glacier Bay National Park, the only ones that have permits to do so, and that does include Holland America and Princess, and those permits cover the entire decade from 2020 to 2030, so there's no squeezing in an extra ship up there. You're either on that Glacier Bay schedule or you're not. And with 60 ships now operating in Alaska, more than ever before, not every sailing can get a Glacier Bay day. There simply aren't enough permit slots to go around. So when you go to book an Alaskan cruise and the brochure shows those glaciers, make sure you read your itinerary carefully, because the overcrowding problem isn't just affecting the towns that we visit in Alaska, it's now affecting which natural wonders we can even access when we're there. Enough about how this overcrowding of the Alaskan ports impacts cruisers. Let's talk about the 30,000 people who actually live in Juneau year-round and what they think about all this. Well, in 2024, a Juneau resident got so frustrated with the situation that she gathered over 2,300 signatures and put a ballot initiative in front of the entire city. It was called Ship Free Saturdays, and the idea was simple: ban cruise ships carrying more than 250 passengers from docking in the city of Juneau on Saturdays and the 4th of July. And her reasoning for this was that Ship-Free Saturdays would give residents of Juneau some relief. Every week, they would have one day to just breathe. They could just take a pause. They could do things in their homes without the constant helicopter noise. They could go out in the community and not be diluted by all the people who aren't from there. She specifically called out the helicopter tours and the whale watching and glacier flights that run constantly all summer. She said that on any given day, she got anywhere from 50 to 75 helicopter flights over her house. And that's not an exaggeration, but actually groups of 2 to 5 helicopters every 20 minutes all day long going up there to see the glaciers. Now, that initiative for Ship-Free Saturdays actually lost. Nearly 60% of voters voted it down. Now, that's partly because of real economic concerns and partly because the cruise industry and local businesses massively outspent the supporters of the initiative. By some estimates, the opposition outspent the yes side by 1,000 to 1. And even the cruise lines got involved because Royal Caribbean sent a letter threatening to sue the city if Ship-Free Saturdays passed. So it got pretty serious there. Then the day after the election results were certified, Royal Caribbean actually announced a partnership to build a brand new cruise terminal on Douglas Island, adding even more capacity to Juneau's already maxed out waterfront. Here's what I found most telling about all this. Every year, Juneau runs a survey of resident attitudes towards tourism, and in 2002, 40% of residents said that tourism had a net positive impact on their community. But 23 years later, in 2025, that number had dropped to just 29%. The trend line is unmistakable. The people who live in Alaska are slowly but steadily souring on the industry that depends on their home. So where does all this go? Well, the industry's answer is more. More ships, more passengers, more capacity. Let's just build more. Juneau now has a voluntary 5 ships per day cap, which is exactly what I witnessed that day. There were only 5 ships there, but honestly, no more ships could have, because there were 4 docked, which is all that can dock, and then there was a 5th that was out anchored in the harbor. Voluntary does a lot of work in that sentence because the 5 ship limit only holds as long as the cruise lines agree to it. It is voluntary after all. And with MSC, Virgin Voyages, Ritz-Carlton Yacht Collection, Crystal Cruises, and others all entering Alaska just this 2026 season, well, the pressure on that agreement is only going to increase. And the bigger question here is, what happens when Alaska becomes a victim of its own popularity? 2/3 of all out-of-state visitors to Alaska currently arrive by cruise ship. The state's economy is genuinely dependent on the cruising industry, but the residents, the infrastructure, and the natural parks have hard limits, and the industry is bumping up against all of those limits simultaneously. Now, we've recently seen this issue in Venice, Italy. Barcelona has had this problem. Santorini, Greece has actually capped cruise passengers. The pattern globally is the same here. A beautiful destination gets discovered, tourism explodes, locals push back, and by the time the real restrictions arrive, the character of the place has already changed. Juneau isn't quite there yet, but the trend lines are pointing in that one direction. And again, it's not very popular with the residents who live there. Now, I want to be abundantly clear about where I stand on this, because I know some of you are going to say it. You're probably saying it already. Well, Zach, you're literally one of those cruise passengers. We've just seen you I just put out a video about my short excursions in Alaska and about my experience on board the Holland America Koningsdam. And you're absolutely right. I am. I love Alaska. I want to go back. An Alaska cruise is always an incredible experience, and I would recommend that experience to anyone. But I also think it's worth being honest about what we're all participating in when we show up 5 ships at a time to a town of 30,000 people. And I saw the effects firsthand that day in Juneau. The tour guides, I mean, some of these were like young teenagers, and they were just, I could tell. I saw this one guy who was trying to keep track of everybody, and he was overwhelmed. And I looked at him and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I'm trying. This is just a lot of people. We're not used to this." And I said, "Well, just hang in there. You're doing a great job." I tried to encourage him a little bit, but this is overwhelming for the residents. And I saw this is a real problem. This is something I think that we should talk about. We should have a conversation about. The experience that we're buying when we go to Alaska, when we sell an Alaskan cruise, that untouched wilderness, the authentic small town Alaska feel, that is the very thing that's going to get eroded when too many of us show up at the same time to buy it. I don't have a perfect answer here, neither does the city of Juneau, obviously, but like I mentioned, it's certainly worth having a conversation. So please leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think about this. Is Alaska getting too crowded, or these little ports in Alaska, these little towns, just receiving too many passengers at the same time? Or is this just tourism doing what tourism does? I want to say thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please go down below, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy it, no need to say anything. You can just see your way out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next adventure.